Send your best man to come down and fight. Defeat me, and all the Philistines will be your slaves.
40 days this Philistine has challenged us. Not one man in my army has had the courage to face him.
Your duty is to watch over the sheep.
You always carry that sling.
A shepherd's tool.
A deadly weapon in the right hands.
The kings of Gath have Goliath as their champion. Where is my champion?
I am your loyal servant. I will go and fight him.
You cannot battle a man like Goliath. He has been a warrior all his days.
Challenge your eyes.
A warrior is not a sword, nor a shield, nor is he the sum of his strength and training. It's what's inside a warrior's heart that makes him fierce, that makes him powerful. For when God is with you, no one can stand against you.
All right. Wow. Okay, what I want you to do is to turn to your neighbor and say, "You look great today." Go for it. All right, all right. Now turn back to that same neighbor and say, "But looks can be deceiving." Oh, no, that's right. Okay. Let me ask you this question. How many of you like brutally honest people? Okay, all right, okay, cool. And how many of you consider yourself to be a brutally honest person? Okay. All right, well, that's good. Actually, I think that's probably, if you stop and think about it, that's a little bit of a hard question to answer. Because there's probably a difference between being brutally honest and being honest, right? Because brutal honesty may mean that you're just being rude, right? It could be. It can be considered to be just rudeness, you know, because sometimes brutal honesty is just telling the truth whether they ask for it or not, right? Or whether they want to know or those kind of things, you know. But there's a difference between being brutally honest and being honestly honest, if I can say it that way. I'd have to say that even though there definitely is a time and place for being brutally honest, there definitely is. There's also a lot to be said for being, you know, for some kind words and stuff like that now and then. You know, that don't mean you have to lie about it, but, you know, some kind words are kind of nice once in a while, too. You know, I've always heard if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. I think that's probably a fairly decent motto to live by, you know, because that's one of those things that you know, you got to have a little bit of temper there as far as what you say to who you say it to. So let me just welcome you to week number 2 of our brand new series called Hallowed Hal. And Hallowed Hal, if you haven't seen the movie, is about a guy who he has this, they kind of put a spell on him in a sense, and so all he can see is the heart of people, not what they actually look like on the outside. So what we're doing is we're taking really kind of a brutally honest look at some of the Old Testament saints, and we know that a lot of the Old Testament saints are called saints, and we've kind of been taught over the years, maybe we always kind of naturally think that, well, if they're called saints, then they must not have sinned. You know, they didn't do anything wrong, that their lives were perfect, that everything they did was wonderful. But, you know, we're looking at some of the Old Testament saints, some of the most popular ones, as a matter of fact, and some that aren't so popular, that weren't anywhere near as saintly as we might like to consider them to be. So with those Old Testament saints, a matter of fact, most of the time you'll find places in the Old Testament that talk about the fact that they really weren't very saintly at all. As a matter of fact, it kind of reminds me of what Paul said over in the book of Corinthians when he said that even the Gentiles wouldn't be caught doing that. You know, they do some of those kinds of things. And so, but you know, religion today often teaches that the evil that they did back then was somehow okay with God because God called them righteous in the New Testament. And those are kind of the ones that we're looking at, is those Old Testament people that are mentioned again in the New Testament, and God has something good to say about them and says, well, they were righteous or whatever the case might be. So let me just welcome you here. We're just glad that you're with us today here at Grace Life El Paso campus, as well as all of you are viewing us online throughout the United States as well as around the world, literally. We're just glad to have you with us today. You know, serving God is serving Jesus is the best thing you can do in your life. And I'll tell you what, gathering together with God's people to just enjoy each other's company and to learn together and to encourage each other is a pretty awesome thing to do. So today we're going to be looking at a man by the name of David. Maybe you know him as King David, because that's kind of how he ended up his life, as a king. Or maybe you know him as a small shepherd boy, tending sheep with his father. Or as we saw in the video, maybe you remember him as the guy that fought Goliath and won, that 9-foot tall giant, you know. Either way, God specifically said about David that he was a man after my own heart. Okay? God specifically said that David was a man after my own heart. Now, David's story begins as the youngest brother out of 8 brothers. He had 8 brothers, and he was the very youngest. I can't imagine. How many of you have large families like that? Anybody? Okay, yeah. Some of us do. I know that in my family tree, that my grandfather had I think he had 8 or 10 kids. And then his second wife had 8 or 10 kids, so they had a whole bunch of kids between them, you know. It just, and you still find some large families nowadays once in a while, not near so much as you used to. But, I think that the reason for that is probably because, back in earlier days, that you needed help on the ranch or you needed help on the farm. So they raised lots of kids to help do some of the work around the farm and the ranch, those kind of things. So naturally, being the youngest of these eight brothers, David was probably left with doing the most menial chores. How many of you are the youngest of brothers? Anybody? How many of you are the youngest of the children? Anybody? Babies of the family? We got a few babies of the family. Yeah, I was the middle of 3 boys, and it seemed to me like my little brother always got the favoritism, you know. We'd all 3 get in trouble in church for some reason. When they get us home, they'd take us in there and pound on all of us. They'd start with the oldest one, pound on him a while. And when they got done with him, they'd drag me in there and pound on me. And by the time they got down to him, he was right outside the door crying. They said, "Oh, he's suffered enough already, oh jerk, He deserved to be pounded just like the rest of us did, But we all grew up to be good anyhow, one way or the other. It's really good. But, no matter how you remember David, whether you think of him in that respect, as a shepherd boy, or as a king, or as a guy who fought Goliath, or any of those kind of things, he was actually proved that he was a very brave and courageous man, even in his younger years. Kind of interesting when you read about his younger years and read about some of the things that he did back then, because in his younger years he actually did his own animal damage control. He tended sheep for his father, and then he did his own animal damage control, which means that any animals or whatever that came to kill the sheep, well, he went and took care of that damage, right? Well, quite honestly, I worked for animal damage control for about 11 years, 10 or 11 years in my early career, and I really expected that's probably what I'd do the rest of my life, and that's the kind of thing I did. It was a lot of fun, a lot of good work. But David said that he actually did all that work himself. As a matter of fact, in his own words, he said in 1 Samuel chapter 17, he said, "When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him, and I attacked him, and I rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by the beard and struck him and killed him." Wow. How many of you hunted lion or bear? Anybody ever hunted lion or bear? I have. I've hunted both. And I guarantee you, I would not want to do hand-to-hand combat with either one, even if I had a 44 in the other hand. I don't care. Just not one of those things you particularly want to do. So he was a pretty tough kid. He was a pretty brave kid and pretty courageous, So we also know that David was a very accomplished musician. Maybe you know David as being a musician. How many of you ever think about it in that respect? No? Yeah, some of you, okay. That he was a very accomplished musician. Because in 1 Samuel 16 it tells us that after Saul had anointed David as the successor to King Saul, or after Samuel had anointed David to the successor to King Saul, that Saul went into this kind of a deep depression kind of a thing. And I think the Bible even says kind of like an evil spirit overtook him. And so his servants said, "Well, let's do this. He said, let our Lord now command your servants who are before you. Let them seek a man who is skillful player on the harp, and it shall come about when the evil spirit of God is on you, from God is on you, that he shall play the harp with his hand, and you will be well. Then one of the young men said, behold, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, who is a skillful musician, a mighty man of valor, a warrior, one prudent in speech, and a handsome man, and the Lord is with him. Okay, so what they did is they went and they found David. King Saul was having problems, having difficulties. He would go into these fits of rage. I don't think I'd ever want to be around a king who was in a fit of rage, because he had all the power and all the authority he at his disposal. I mean, if he decided to have, take those 5 guys out and have them killed, he could do that. If, just in a fit of rage, it wasn't any big deal. So they found David, and they brought him before the king, and he was to play for him. And sure enough, it did prove to kind of soothe his tortured soul, if you want to call it that. So, okay, so since this harp thing, when most of us guys think about, how many guys ever considered playing a harp? Yeah, me too. Okay, one, all right. I never have. I don't think I ever. Well, I did. I guess I did think about it one time. Thought it would be kind of fun to plunk on one to see what they're like, So, but it didn't sound exactly like an instrument that a mighty man of valor would play. A warrior. So I looked up harp in the original Hebrew language to find out what the word harp means, and what I found out is that the original word for harp comes from an unusual root word meaning to twang. Okay? So in my opinion, the harp should literally be translated as banjo.
I figured that was going to come somewhere.
Yeah, it had to be. I'm sure that's what it was. No, I'm just kidding, of course. Except that, I'm kidding except for the fact that the original Hebrew word did mean to twang. Really did. I'm not sure I'd consider twanging to be beautiful music, but I don't think a banjo twangs either. And I don't want to hear otherwise, okay? All right. But, so the twang part's actually true. So, while he was still very young, a real young man, too young, in fact, to be a soldier or to fight in the army or any of those kind of things, David's father instructed him to take some food to his 3 oldest brothers who were fighting in the war, and who were fighting against Saul, against the Philistines. And while he was there, he saw this 9-foot-tall giant, Goliath, who had been taunting Israel for 40 days straight. Okay? And this man stepped out into the valley between these 2 armies and taunted them. And here's what he said. He said, choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us. Again, the Philistines said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. So he's defying God's people to somehow bring up a man that was able to stand against a 9-foot-tall giant. I can't imagine. 9 foot that's pretty tall. Most of our houses are only 8 foot, but the tall house, the guys that have good tall ceilings are 8-foot ceilings or 8-foot walls at least. May have like this roof, a pitched roof on it, vaulted ceiling. But that's if you can think about a man that stands as tall as 8 foot, only another foot higher than that. That's a big man. That's a big man. And I don't get the idea either from what the Bible says that he was this, like the basketball player. What's his name? The tallest basketball player that from Japan or China, wherever he's from. Yeah, young. And he's not anywhere near that tall, but he's real thin, and real lanky. I highly doubt that Goliath was that way. I did see a man, as a matter of fact, a cop over in Rudy's here a while back, and he was real tall. I mean, he must have been 6'7", 6'6" or 6'7", somewhere along in there. But he was a big man besides, He was huge. I can't imagine.
You're just looking at me again.
Was that you I saw? Okay. I can't imagine a 9-foot guy that's being, you know, big and that just, wow, beyond me, beyond me. So Goliath did this every morning for 40 days, and I think you probably know the rest of the story. David, actually, when David was there, he went to Saul and he said, let me do it, you know. David, a little shepherd boy. I don't know how tall he was, but, you know, probably being Jewish, he probably wasn't very tall, and he was very young besides, and all those different kind of things. And, of course, you know, I think you know the story. Ultimately, he did go out and he fought Goliath. He chose 5 small smooth stones from the creek, and he used one of them and killed Goliath dead right there on the spot. But David's story takes a rather sinister turn, I guess I can say that, sinister, maybe there's a better word, later in his life, because after he was crowned king, after he succeeded Saul and became king, and it was at the very height, the very pinnacle of his reign as king, that King David was relaxing on the top of his castle and just enjoying himself up there, and he spied a beautiful young woman taking a bath. I think probably most of us, in one way or another, remember David in that respect as well. What was her name? Bathsheba. The movie's been made. Lots of movies have been made about those kind of things. Yeah. So through his messengers, then David sent some guys. He not only learned that her name was Bathsheba, but that she also had a husband by the name of Uriah, and that Uriah was working as a soldier under King David. He was fighting battles for King David. Okay, so he knows all this. David knows all this. He learned this from his messengers as they went to get Bathsheba and bring her back, that she's not only married, that her name is Bathsheba, her husband's name is Uriah, and he's also fighting in his army. Right? Now, I've done that because I want you to keep that in mind when we talk about the rest of this, because we're talking about a man after God's own heart, right? And he's taken this woman, Bathsheba, who's married, knows the man's name, all those things, right? He's actually fighting for King David in the army. So the Bible tells us that David sends these messengers and took her. When he came to him, he lay with her, and when she had purified herself from the uncleanness, she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, Bathsheba conceived, and she sent and told David and said, I am pregnant. I don't know how many of you guys have ever maybe had that happen to you. You know, you're a young man and you're, you know, a girl you think you're in love with, or maybe you don't think you're in love with. It's just one of those things you want to do, and she turns up pregnant and you panic, right? You know, you both panic. It becomes a panic situation. I'm sure that she is panicking as much as he is, right? I don't think that this was a forced thing, my opinion. I think Bathsheba went willingly. I think that there was a lot in there as far as that was concerned. I think it was consensual. I'm just going to say it that way. I think it was consensual. She thought, well, man, she can sleep with the king. Man, what more could you want, right? Look at the power that's behind that. So I think that David is in panic mode right now, because not only is he the king of Israel, right? The king of Israel has been caught, is fixing to get caught doing something that he never should have got caught doing. But the fact is, almost from the moment that he was born, had always been the most highly respected and greatly admired man in Israel, all because of his impeccable reputation as a holy and righteous man of God. Now you add all those things together, and I think you can kind of see and hear the panic in David at this point in time. Because he's not only the king of Israel, but he's also got this reputation of being upright and righteous and honest and holy. and a man of valor, and all those different kinds of things. And now he's been caught doing something behind the scenes that he knew better, right? He knew better, and he did it anyway. And now he's fixing to get caught doing this, right? Going to destroy his reputation. I mean, if you stop and think about what the Jimmy Swaggart scandal did, right? That went not only nationwide, but probably worldwide. Not only was he ruined both, financially and professionally, but he became basically the laughingstock of the nation and probably of the world, and in a lot of ways still is. In a lot of ways still is. He's back on TV, but he has a very limited following. He's still making money, of course, but and there's others that have been involved in those kind of things and that kind of stuff and get caught at it. I'm pretty sure that David is playing a similar scenario in his heart and in his mind right now when she sends word to him that says, "I'm pregnant. Now what are we going to do, right? Now what are we going to do?" So what does he do? Okay, let's check this out. Then David sent to Joab, saying, Joab is the commander of the army, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." So Joab sent Uriah to David. And when Uriah came to him, David asked concerning the welfare of Joab and the people and the state of the war. Okay. You gotta kind of keep your common sense about you here in order to kind of see what's going on. Because what's happening here is that David is buttering Uriah up. He's starting this buttering up process. He says, "Send me Uriah," and then he asks him these military questions as though Uriah is an officer, which I don't think he was. I think he was just a regular man in the army. As though he's some kind of an officer, and asking him, okay, what is it that you've done, and what's going on out there in the field, and give me the details. I need to know these kind of things. And so it gets really hairy. So he says, then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house, wash your feet." And Uriah went down out of the king's house, and a present from the king was given a present, was sent out after him. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and he did not go down to his house. Okay, so he's continuing this buttering up process by not only telling him, hey, thanks for the information, man. Couldn't do this without you. You're an important man in Israel, and you're an important man in the army. We need more men like you, right? And then he tells him, well, go home and sleep, sleep at home, for the night. And then he sends presents too, right? Why would a king send presents to a man in the army? Right? He hasn't been, pinned with a medal of valor or some kind, That's not what's happening here. He just picks him out of the field, tells him to go see the king, come see the king, and the king butters him up and then sends gifts to him and all those kind of things. But Uriah, because he is an upstanding soldier, he is an upstanding man, he's saying to himself, no, I'm not going to do that. My buddies are out in the field fighting, right? I'm not going to go home and be comfortable while they're out there in the field fighting. I've talked to other men. I've never been in the military. I have high respect for our military. The highest of respect for our military. But I've talked to guys that come home from the field for maybe a short period of time, and the whole time I've talked to guys in the field, they seem to feel bad the whole time they're here because their buddies are over there fighting. I need to be over there helping to protect them, right? I think you kind of get that idea as well. It's one of those things. So not only is David attempting to get Uriah to sleep with his wife, but the reason is so that when she does turn up pregnant, no one will ever know that David was the one who knocked her up, quite honestly. But then he also tries to bribe him with some kind of a present. I don't know what he's saying. So David's really going overboard in trying to make Uriah feel important. How many of you ever had a boss that did that to you? Anybody? Yeah, I have. Really pissed me off, man. It did. I was real young. I was probably 18 years old, 17, 18 years old. Boss called me into the main office of the store there, and he said, you know, you strike me as a real knowledgeable, real upstanding man, you know, real smart man. And the way he said it was, I just got this feeling that he was buttering me up for some reason, you know. He just got that gut feeling. I wanted to punch him is what I wanted to do, you know. Well, I didn't last very long at that place because that guy I knew was dishonest, and you know, it just wasn't a good thing. So at that point, then Uriah is actually more righteous than what David is, because he's too loyal to his brothers in arms to actually go do what David would call him to do. So what does David do next? Well, check this out. Then David said to Uriah, "Stay here today also and tomorrow, and I will let you go." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. So he extends his furlough, right? He brings him home, tells him go sleep with your wife, in so many words. Didn't say that, but that's what he was indicating. That's what he wanted him to do, of course. And when Uriah didn't do that, when he slept at the door with the rest of the servants, and David knew that, he said, "Wait a minute, let's give you a couple more days. You know, you'll soften up and you go, man, I got to go home and see the wife, all right? I got to go home and see the wife for a few minutes." Well, he didn't do that either. You know, he's really, really trying really hard. So, you know, I mean, does this man have no shame? Right? David I'm talking about, does he have no shame? He's really playing evil things here, you know. Well, can he get any worse than that? Yeah, actually he can. Because David's about to add murder on top of adultery and trickery and bribery and everything else in an effort to hide his little sin of adultery. Okay, I said little sin of adultery because adultery ain't nothing compared to what he's about to do next. Makes adultery look like chicken feed, right? So check this out. Now in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he had written in the letter saying, "Place Uriah in the front line of the fiercest battle and withdraw from him so that he may be struck down and die." Wow. Wow. Even if Uriah wasn't killed, that's dirty, is it not? That is dirty. That's about as dirty as you can get. David actually sends written execution orders by the very man who he's going to have executed. That's what he's doing. He's having executed. And he involves all these other people in the process of his execution orders. If you're on the battlefield with your buddies and they say, "Pull back and leave him there," come on. Everybody knows what's going on, right? Why would you do that? Well, you got your orders, dude. You got your orders. Order specifically tells Joab to put Uriah on the front lines of battle and then to have him killed. Wow. That's murder. That's murder. That's all it is. So to make a long story shorter, Joab did exactly what David had written in the orders, and he sends a messenger back to David to tell David, Uriah's dead. He's done. So, now when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband. When the time of mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife. Then she bore him a son. But the thing that David had done was evil in the sight of the Lord. Again, I'm going to tell you that God doesn't try to hide anything from us. You know, He's going to tell the truth even if it hurts. But He has. That's a pretty sordid story, is it not? Some pretty bad stuff that David did there. Wow. He had the power to do it, and he did it. That's crazy. Can you believe this? It's just unbelievable. I mean, you'd have to be a shallow Hal to believe that David is a saint after all that, right? Does that sound very saintly to any of you? Well, me either. And yet still we read in Acts 13:22 that God says that after he had removed him, Saul, he raised up David to be their king, and concerning whom he had also testified and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will. Ain't very saintly, is he? And yet God says he is. You see, what most people fail to see or to understand is that big G grace is alive and well in the Old Testament as it is in the New Testament. It is. We see it right here. If big G grace was not alive and well in the Old Testament, God would have just struck him dead on the spot and said, okay, we're moving on from here. Find somebody else, right? Why? Because Old Testament saints were saved in the same way that New Testament saints are. The only difference is that they look ahead by faith to the death of Jesus Christ, that he would die on the cross for them, whereas we look back to that day. That's the only difference. And that David also recognized that the only good in him was the God in him. That's what makes a difference. David recognized that the only good in him was the God in him. You and I aren't good in our own. David was not good on his own. And left to our own devices, we will become as evil as you can be. Don't care who we are. It's the God in us that is the good in us, not us. So, man, let me tell you right up front. Guys, listen. Great godly leaders are willing to step aside from their own need for ego and self-confidence and humble themselves before an almighty God. That is what a true warrior is. A true warrior is, a great godly leader is, one who is willing to step aside from their own need for ego and self-confidence and humble themselves before an almighty God. When we do that, God is the one who raises us up as great warriors. That is when we become great warriors in God's kingdom, is when we humble ourselves before him and allow him to be the good in us. God's awesome. God's awesome. I'm glad it's him and not me. If it were me, I'd be in trouble. My name's David, and I would be a David if it were not for the God in me. I guarantee you. God's awesome. And he is a warrior. We find here that he says he is a warrior. God's awesome. Lord bless you all.